Hello, Kathryn and Roxanna. Welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so good to see the both of you.
Great to see you too, Matt and Richard.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Well, it is a wonderful thing, and we do catch up with each other on a number of occasions. Matt, Kathryn, and Roxanna, and Dan Short, and Lawrence have been Logger Sugarman have been working on a book chapter, which is coming out soon in Rutledge. So that was very exciting. But what we've done is what you've done, Kathryn and Roxanna, is over a long period of time, you have not reworked, you've refreshed and done wonderful things with, behind me, those brown volumes, the 16 volumes of the Milton H. Erickson collected works. And what we're celebrating that now, and we're going to be putting the reviews that I did over a 6-year period, sort of gradually working through each of the volumes, and we're going to reproduce those in the magazine. But we wanted to talk to you guys about these books, about Erickson, about Rossi, why it matters. Why should anyone bother reading these 16 volumes? Those sorts of things. But of course, we think it's very important. So how about just as an introduction, maybe start with you, Kathryn, a little bit of what you think we need to hear about, and Roxanna following up there, and then we'll see where it goes.
Absolutely. Well, when I got involved in the project of getting the collected works out again, my question was, is this going to be real? Is this going to be good? I don't want to do anything quaint or nostalgic. And everybody assured me, no. This is alive in the moment. And it really is that when you consider how to think, this is not something that we're given privy to very often. And so we're left with our own ways of going about and working through things. And yet, when you look at these cases within the 16 volumes, every single one of them opens up my mind of a different way to think, a different way to experience. And that going to Erickson, who was constantly experimenting, that's what he did all the time, constantly experimenting. I wonder about this, I wonder about that. And then Ernest came along and he wanted to understand. And so throughout the course of these books, you can pick them up, read a chapter, put it down, come to the next one. But Ernie he really wants to understand why you're doing what you're doing when you're doing it, and also from vast perspectives. And so the privilege of being a professional, as we all are, and yet to have somebody that can help to expand our thinking, that's huge.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. I mean, there's several Ericksonian phrases which constantly reappear in my discussions, and that one, that every therapy is a field experiment and not a reproduction. But there was actually something interesting that we were hearing yesterday. Scott Miller, I was listening to, talking to, is this practice. We talk about therapeutic practice. He says that's actually what you do outside of therapy. What you do during therapy is therapy performance, therapy action, and so it's an unexpected, improvised experience. But I'm just chattering away about what I've learned, about how I've learned to think differently and incorporate my own types of thinking into things. So Roxanna, I mean, we're kind of going back to even closer to the source than Ernie, because your name is Roxanna Erickson and you have married and you're Klein. So you are actually Erickson's daughter, in case anybody didn't pick this up. You must have just a wonderful understanding of this. And I know you've worked so hard over the years in bringing this information. I'm just going to let you go, undo the leash, and away you go.
So of course, I entered into the Ericksonian realm as an infant, as a child, and grew over the years without the perspective of how unique my father's approaches to living and to teaching and to working were. And so I entered into this project in something of a different way than Kathryn, who entered in by choice. I entered from an appreciation for the importance of primary works. And of course, by the time I was an adult, I was fully aware of the importance of going to the source of the information, to going to the cutting edge of what is known, and to explore it from the closest to the font of information that you possibly could. So my choice really was to make these primary works available to a broader, to preserve them and make the outreach to a broader audience. So that's what really motivated me. But as a professional and as an adult now, I have a much richer and much deeper appreciation for the manner in which the wealth of information, particularly between Ernest Rossi and my dad, Milton Erickson, the way the two of them were able to look at, well, he just worked with a client and evoked some fantastic response. And then Ernest was right there saying, how did you do that? Or what does it mean? Can you explain that? Since my dad is known for his indirect and unique ways of working, it was very difficult to understand. You can read his case reports and get all confused. Well, why did it go in that direction? Or what was he trying to do? So the average first pass over looking at the case reports are very confusing. But when you go back and reread with Ernie's inquiry and with his insatiable curiosity. And then, to me, the most exciting part is that one of the things that Erickson taught was this is not the gospel. The word does not stop here. He wanted one of his basic tenets, he wanted individuals to learn about themselves, and then to go beyond his work. And Ernest was younger and interested, educated in a different way, and was able to carry my father's work forward in a way really that no one else has been able to.
Yes, and it was just wonderful. You know, pardon me, Matt, sort of taking over, but I guess this is my sort of space.
It is,
and just listening to that and talking about Ernie, because of course there's these wonderful annotations from Ernie throughout the book, and I know there were several occasions when he would go away, he would take the case study away, figure out and work out the frameworks and where Erickson went, and he would come back and report that back to Erickson, and when he said, "Is that what you were doing?" and Erickson would just agree, he says, "Yes," because of course he wasn't working like a technician. He was working as a skillful utilizer of his qualities.
It sounds like he wasn't working from a theoretical, perspective first. He was working intuitively and pragmatically, and then, of course, Ernest came and built in, articulated
Yeah, you articulated beautifully. But there was a wonderful experience, Kathryn. If you could remember to share a bit more about it. And pardon me, am I right in saying it's volume 3? But where Ernie asks, can you?
If I have an open mind.
Yes. Can you do something? Can you give me a hypnosis or do something that will make me a better therapist, that will open my mind? And it went in a direction that Ernie was absolutely not expecting. Can you remember a bit of that story?
Oh, totally. Well, you know what? I have to say something a little bit before of how it is that Milton and Ernie worked together. Ernie would drive from Los Angeles to Phoenix for a couple of days or 1 week out of the month. And he'd sit in sessions with Erickson and he would record these. Then he would have them transcribed. And then he'd be thinking about these cases. And when he came back the following month, he had a lot of questions. And so the amount of care that went into it was really huge. Now on volume 3, I mean, I guess we can dance around with the different volumes. Volume 3 is called Opening the Mind. And it just so happened that the last time that Ernie was with Milton, it wasn't expected that Milton would die, right? And so they were just having a session, and Milton's personal physician, Marion Moore, was there. And so Marion Moore was, he liked microphones and cameras and things like that. And there must have been about 5 microphones on Erickson to get the good audio. And so it was a videotape of Ernie asking, how do I have an open mind? And because it was the last time, it just sat, like in the archives. I was sent a DVD of lots of these things. And so I said, I'm going to start with the last one. And that's how it got to, I transcribed it. And in it, that it's a total lesson on doing therapy. Ernie thought he was just a colleague, but they were dovetailing back and forth with this joint therapy, between him and taking him all kinds of places, ping-ponging him all over the place into different consciousnesses. And he, I used to tease Ernie. I said, well, it certainly worked because you've always had an open mind.
But didn't they start talking in imagery? It was, what was it? Seagulls.
Oh, it was when they started off. It was about, when you're lying out in a chair and you're getting a tan, and doesn't that feel good? So and that was how Erickson often did things, that seemingly off the wall, of trying to stimulate, of going from the conscious mind to welcoming the unconscious mind. And, there's so many words that are used for it, to destabilize, but it's basically to open up the door for what you don't know to come forward, even though you have a direction, in this case, open mind.
Well, that segues beautifully to, I'm sure, that some things you want to say there, Roxanna, about just this way of Ericksonian work of the process.
Well, so many people equate Erickson with an indirect approach, and it is true that it was hard to get a straight logical answer out of him. Now, the fallacy is he did frequently give directives when he was working. And he occasionally gave direct answers if you could squeeze him into it. But what he was known for, really, is this indirect way of working. But it really goes beyond simple indirect suggestion. What he was really doing was turning the subject's attention into their own internal experiences and evoking that creative search and discovery within the individual that wasn't a suggestion at all. It was really a process of exploration to what resources do you have inside that are going to assist you in your own process of growth and development.
Yes, it's so interesting, and of course I'm a sort of an outcome of Rossi, so therefore my experience with Erickson is through what was already embedded in Ernest Rossi. But I know that one of the things that we worked with using the technique, I suppose technique, if we like to call it that, but the approach that we call mirroring hands, and that what began to happen and what I've learned over the years, and then with my own practice of it, is that actually the most appropriate suggestion can emerge from the client themselves in their own words, and quite often they're very surprised about it. And I also agree that sometimes I find myself being directive because that's what the client asks for. They basically sort of say, I need you to tell me something, so of course you're going to tell them something. So indirect doesn't mean you don't direct, quite so. But I'm fascinated at the number of times people will say something, it feels like I want to be so and so and so and so. And it's just then going, well, yes, I think that's wonderful. And we follow that emergence, and you hear that and see that in the various, the copious numbers of papers and case examples. So when people are working with these case examples, you've given us some insight already, Roxanna, is read it, and if you don't sort of immediately gel with it, don't worry, go back, have a look again. It's like getting into the theme and the context of it. What else might we need to might be useful for us to have in mind or have in the openness? And also, Kathryn, you've talked about openness of mind. Just something else as we're looking at these papers, and perhaps that we can transfer almost immediately into our therapeutic practice now.
Well, we're talking at the same time. I'll answer first. I think
Kathryn first.
that there's a trust that you follow, and I want to give a little case example that I was reading about in Experiencing Hypnosis about a woman who was blind since the age of 2. And she came to Erickson because she wanted to remember the face of her mother. And when you think about somebody coming in to see you that's blind, that wants to remember a face, and they're an adult now, how do you go about doing that? And that's when you find Erickson's principles really come alive, that in the way that he thought, it was about what do you really want? Or what does a person like you really want? And he came from the point of view in this particular case is that every woman wants to meet a stranger at some point, and of course, meet a stranger, fall in love. And he used the body mind principles in order to have her do hand levitations. And so he worked with her in a way that she could receive it, which is that when you can't see, you've got to use other senses. It's this masterful case that on the surface, it would seem like so perplexing. Where would you go with this? What would you do with this? But he would go to the essence of what he thought that person was and what they actually wanted and what was universal in wanting it.
And it's under, this is, I suppose, a lot to do with our science of psychotherapy approach of there's a lot of technical knowledge that we put out there, but what it does is it gives you a deeper insight into who the human being is. I was saying at a conference the other day, I said, why do you learn this stuff? And everybody sort of went, oh, well, I don't know. And I said, well, if you have two people that you're talking to, one is a friend and you're at a party, one is a friend and one is someone you've just met, your friend has these cues that you're used to, that you understand, that you appreciate about when they've had enough and they want to go. And so you see that cue and you say to your friend, we can go now. And they go, oh, good, yes. And off you go. Whereas to the person that you don't know and you don't understand their particular frameworks and constructions, they give a few cues and you say, oh, do you want to go now? They say, what are you talking about? Why are you telling me to go? And of course, you can create an enactment. You can create a rupture in the relationship. And so that aspect of that constant pursuance and investigation and exploration and experiment, as we've just been saying, with what it is to be human and what it is to be a different human is something that these volumes just bring out unbelievably. You read one volume and you read 20 papers. You've read 20 investigations into human beingness. Roxy, how am I going there in those thoughts?
One of the things is that the papers that are included in this series, some of them were written in the 1920s and the 1930s, and he kept on throughout his career exploring and developing and adding on and building in really not a real logical sequential order, but he'd learn something and then he'd expand, and he'd learn and then expand. So one of the privileges is both Ernest and my dad were geniuses in their own way. So watching that growth process as they sought to better understand human nature and to create effective psychotherapeutic approaches and to understand the nature of the individual, just watching that develop and emerge, or reading about how that emerged, which is never discussed in a logical sequential, but it becomes an experience for the reader. And for Kathryn and I, it becomes a growth experience. And even as you said, you first read a case and you think, well, that doesn't make much sense. And then you go on and read something else and just let it sit. That illustrates one of the essential principles of this work, is that it really takes time. The individual grows, develops, there is an incubation phase, and then there is a natural growth that occurs. You come back, you look at it again, wow, I'm understanding in a way that I didn't understand before. And so these works really elicit the growth from the readers.
Yes, and the four-stage cycle, of course, we're talking about there. And next month, we'll have the review of the first volume. This month, I've just put the overview, but I've just got some of the words here sort of in the many notes and bits and pieces and everything, in the volume. But in 1923, Milton H. Erickson was an undergraduate student at the University of Wisconsin. His supervising professor was Clark L. Hull, with whom Erickson found a number of fundamental disagreements, most notably Erickson's ideas that the healing effects of psychotherapy, and especially therapeutic hypnosis, was not in the directions of the therapist, but in the inner processes or processes made possible by the client themselves. And of course, this is that early insight, his own prescience to his own work. And I think this concept of prescience is important, but also, Matt, I'm just doing too much. Surely you must have a question by now. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I'm not in the same set as all of you who have been immersed in this for so many years, and so coming at all of this, so these huge volumes from these remarkable men, and then you guys doing, sort of adding another layer on it as well. It could seem a little overwhelming. We're talking about having an incredible amount of intuition and creativity combined with great scientific insight into what's happening. Now, for me, the average, clinical therapist, what's the best way to approach all of this if I'm coming at it sort of fresh?
An open mind, Matt.
An open mind. Okay, good answer.
But also in knowing that there isn't a specific answer. It's, as Roxy says, it's not necessarily in a logical format. It's not a protocol. And so when you want to grow your own mind and to develop the different levels of your own consciousness, particularly as it relates to being a psychotherapist, this is ideal. And you can even, instead of reading it from page 1 to page whatever, you could pick up the volume and say, well, I think I'll start on page 179 today. That if you approach it of, okay, this is the logic, I'm going to learn these skills, I'm going to learn these methods, you're missing the essence. Even though there's tons of directions of how you would deal with a handshake induction, for instance, or catalepsies, or this. So when you want to learn specific things, they're there, but that's just a portion of it. When you can find that something inside of you is being stimulated to be you, not to be Erickson, not to be Rossi, but to be you. And that, to me, is the point of these volumes. Do you think so too, Roxy?
Yeah, absolutely. It is to grow the individual in your own path of discovery. And I want to give a little example. My dad's office was in our home. And so our living room was the waiting room. And we had, I guess it was a somewhat rigid protocol that everything had to be tidy. The magazines had to be stacked and no toys on the floor. And we had to be respectfully quiet. Other series of rules. That was the most rigid aspect of our upbringing. Be respectful of the privacy and the individuals who enter into this waiting room. And so we have several stacks of magazines: National Geographic, Life, Scientific American, some civil rights magazines, and they had to be stacked up with the current one on top. And we would leaf through them, and we're a well-educated family also. And it came to my attention, Scientific American is actually lowered in sophistication over the decades. But in those years, it was really challenging to read. And I remember one time I was like, why do we have a Scientific American? There's nothing in here that even an educated person can understand. It's only for the specialists in science. Why are we taking up the space at the end of the coffee table for a stack of Scientific American? And I threw that question out to my dad. And he just looked at me and he said, well, how do you know that? And I explained to him, well, I know it because I leaf through every issue. Do you ever pause and look at the charts? And I'm like, well, yes, I do. And that's what gives me the confidence that they're, too difficult to understand. Yeah. And then he, in a very subtle way, started talking about osmosis. And, as a child, I wasn't a student. I was one of his children. Finally, directly. So you're telling me that information and wisdom and that knowledge is going to soak in by osmosis? And he just nodded his head. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I hadn't thought about it that way. But the way of approaching a problem, the way of answering a question, the rationale, there was nothing haphazard. It was all individual. It was all creative. It was all going on the margins of what we really don't know and of finding ourselves comfortable with that sensation of, I don't know, but I'm open to learn.
Yeah.
And I just hear this wonderful thing there, Roxy, where Erickson, and as I was thinking as you're doing, you're saying, no one can, I don't understand what's in these magazines. And I guess Erickson, I hope, I'm somewhere in the same framework. He's saying, wow, you know that you don't know. Step one. So you have, that gives you a grasp of the scope of your knowledge. And I found with me when I was doing it, Matt, just in answering a third one, I started with the February Man, the 9th volume, because it's just this long, extraordinary case study. So I did that. But then I was tasked to review each volume, and it's a wonderful thing when you're an apprentice, because your mentor says, I'd like you to review each volume of Erickson once every 4 months for the next for the 16 volumes for the next 6 years. And you just go, yeah, sure. And I go, but I called it my week with Erickson. So that's another thing to do, is you read a volume over a period of time, and then you take a pause. And I would spend then a bit of time writing about it, and which is always, that reflection is terribly important, which of course, was a review. So I was motivated to do so. But we should do this with all our stuff. In fact, I'm doing a talk in a little while for a Canadian counselling group on how to make research human. Because they said, can you teach us how to understand research? And I thought, no, but how to, give it a humanity. So that, I think, there's 3 pretty interesting answers there for you, Matt. It was a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I love the fact that, Milton was so widely read in the sciences. And I think that's, I love reading all sorts of things. And I think it's important for therapists to be widely read and to understand, things about our humanity that aren't directly related maybe to therapy, but, to poetry and history and also all manner of things.
Do you notice that the 4 of us, we have this wonderful conversation and we're just fascinated with what everybody has to say, and there's no competition.
No.
This is how it was for Ernie and Milton, just like what we're doing here, of wanting to come and to learn. So I want to compliment everybody for just being who you are.
That's actually a really interesting comment. I'm actually I argue that critical reasoning was one of the great errors of the Greeks. That actually it's this creative constructionism, this taking something, moving further, even though what you might do is disagree, which is fine, or have some criticism, but saying, from that criticism I've just made, what can we create? Where can we go? And this was the exciting thing in all the stuff we've written. And And when you were saying before that Ernie would go with Erickson, would record things, would transcribe them, would study them, would come back. Of course, that's how we wrote the Mirroring Hands, the Practitioner's Guide to Mirroring Hands. We talk all day. I'd transcribe at night. And the funny thing was, the house that I was staying in, which you had organised for me, was sort of in abeyance. It didn't have any television or internet or anything. So I'd go to bed at 8:30, and I'd wake up at 2:00 in the morning with this wonderful explosion of ideas and things which I would write down and we would examine the next day. And it was really a compressed experience of what Ernie went through. I'm so much just a part of his family and a part of yours, because that's what we did with the book chapter. And Matt, that's what we did with our book. We wrote absolutely. Stuff, we shared it, we engaged. Creatively constructing and curiously wondering where else we can go. Anyway, I've rabbited on.
To make the world a better place.
To make the world a better place, yeah, because it could do with it. But we kind of are running, we have to wrap up a little bit now. I want to talk, we all want to talk again. But we'll do some more a little later on in a few more volumes. Just one thing I want to say is that the volumes are coming out in one by one. I think you've got the fifth one out, and so they will come. So you're not confronted, which is handy, Matt. You're not actually confronted. Oh God, which one will I choose? So you there's a little bit of assistance there.
So maybe in the future we can do a show and just talk about a particular volume and drill down into that. Maybe if you're all open
we'll
to
find something that we really want to do. But for now, how will we wrap this up? Roxanna, are there some things? I know you sort of prepared some bits and pieces. Have we covered anywhere near of what you wanted to put? Is there some stuff that you want to add?
Well, there is a couple of comments I want to make. And, as was pointed out earlier, there is this vast expanse of process of learning. And it seems like everywhere you go, there's, deeper levels and deeper levels. So even though you read it the first time and then read it again, you realized, I'm at a different place now than I was initially. But from my perspective as Erickson's daughter, and one of my personal goals is to bring forth primary works, I want to make a statement that over his career, which he was born in 1901, he died in 1980, and his professional career was from the 1920s to 1980, because he worked essentially until just before he died, that there were certain things he was striving for. And one of the things was the concept of turning your attention inward, trusting your unconscious mind, and recognizing that the guiding forces for you as an individual are to be found inside. So when you look at what he did with hypnotherapy, he made some major changes in the way hypnosis is practiced and accepted on a professional level. But he also made some major changes in his contributions to psychotherapy. So as you appreciate the span of his contributions, they're there. And that's just, to me, that's one point that I want to make. And the most important thing is learning to trust your internal resources and to really appreciate that others can carry the torch beyond where you were. And that's what he and Ernie did together. And that's what Kathryn and I are doing to carry the work of Erickson and Ernest Rossi. We're carrying it forward, and we're hopeful that others will learn from this and carry it forward still.
Yeah, beautiful. I love the website, just the simplicity, the metaphor and the analogy in the title, Erickson-Rossi.com. And so, Kathryn, maybe just a little closure from the Rossi point of view or perspective,
The
or
Rossi point of view.
context.
Well, Roxanna spoke so eloquently, and many of the principles of Erickson are also the principle of Ernest and the principle of me. And it's to have the ability to live in the present moment, that there's so much to look forward to as a therapist when you can be in the present moment and you can respond to the person that's in front of you, and to welcome inner resources you didn't even know you had in your unconscious to be able to carry a therapy farther. And ultimately, the joy of working with people is when they discover it for themselves. Mm-hmm. And that the techniques that Erickson brought forward, the techniques that Ernest has brought forward, and that you continue, Richard, is to be able to awaken that which is within the person. I think of myself as just like a little coach on the side that is really sensitive, but that you, the client, you know the answers. My job is to help you to see if we can find that on new levels.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kathryn and Roxanna. I think this has been a wonderful introduction. I'm really keen to do more, maybe get into some particular volumes, but I think that's a great introduction for now. And I just thank you so much for coming on to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast and gracing us with your presence today.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, an honor to be here.